Hi, I'm Bridget. Welcome to my kitchen where I elevate the everyday with inspiring recipes that are doable for any cook. There's a coziness about sweets and treats baked with apples, and a wholesomeness too. Today we're baking two rustic apple treats, an easy apple pastry and a simple apple cake studded with chocolate chips. Both of the recipes we're making today are old favorites from my mom. The simple apple cake is studded with chocolate chips. This is a true one bowl cake, the sort of cake you bake when you really don't feel like baking a cake. It's fast and easy, it uses oil instead of butter, and doesn't need frosting. The second recipe, apple twists, is a little fiddly but not complicated. They're simply apple wedges wrapped in a buttery pastry and baked. Let's get started with the apple cake. We'll need 3 cups of diced apples. I'll cut them into 1/2 inch dice. You'll see when we add the apples to the batter, it'll feel like it's more apple than cake, but it bakes into a beautiful, moist cake. We'll need between 2 and 3 apples for this cake to make the 3 cups of diced apple. I'll start by dicing just 2 of the apples and then I'll measure, see if we've got our 3 cups. And your 1/2 inch dice doesn't have to be perfect. It's just the idea is to have your pieces of apple fairly small. This is one of the first recipes I put in my very first handwritten cookbook. It's a recipe that my mom got back in the 70s from a woman who used to work with my dad. I made it a lot through university because it's easy to make and was always popular at potlucks. So let's measure and see if we're getting close to 3 cups. 1, 2, so we will need the better part of that 3rd apple. You can have a scant 3 cups, but you don't want more than 3 cups. You'll see what I mean when we add the apples to the batter. Okay, I think that is our 3rd cup. Yes. Now onto the cake batter. We're going to start with the wet ingredients. 3/4 of a cup of grapeseed oil. You could use olive oil, canola oil, vegetable oil. Any kind of mild flavored oil will work. And then a cup of sugar, just granulated sugar. And we'll mix them together. And then I will add 2 beaten eggs. These are large eggs and room temperature. I'll add them 1 at a time just to make sure they're well combined. I'm adding 2 teaspoons of pure vanilla. And then to this, remember I said it is a true 1 bowl cake. I am adding 2 cups of flour, but I always like to mix in a little bit of whole wheat. So I've got 1/2 cup of whole wheat flour, and then I'm going to measure 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour. So there's 1 cup and 2 cups. And I have a generous pinch of salt, probably 1/4 to 1/2 of a teaspoon. And I have a teaspoon of cinnamon and a teaspoon of baking soda. I'll combine those. You could use a mixer, an electric mixer for this, but I find it just as easy to do this whole recipe by hand. As soon as all of the flour is incorporated, then we'll add the apple, chocolate chips, and walnuts. So see how thick this batter is already, and we still have our add-ins. I'll add our 3 cups of diced apple, 1/2 cup of walnut pieces, and 1/2 cup of chocolate chips. I use nice dark chocolate chips, lots of flavor. And see how thick this batter is and how it seems like there are more apples than anything else. Did I mention it's a moist cake, which is understandable when you have this many apples in it. There. Now that the batter is combined, we're going to scrape it into a parchment-lined baking sheet. This recipe calls for an 8x8 pan. You can use a round or square pan. With this cake, I like to leave a nice overhang with the parchment, just so it's easy to lift out to finish cooling once it's baked and out of the oven. So we'll spread it just as evenly as possible, right to the corners. I preheated the oven to 325. Cooks in a slow oven, but it cooks for a long time. I'm going to set the timer for 55 minutes. While the cake's in the oven, we'll get started with the apple twists. Apples and flaky pastry are an irresistible combination. Think of this recipe as a shortcut to apple pie. All the deliciousness half the time. We'll start with a very simple pastry, just 1.5 cups of flour. I use 1 cup of all-purpose flour and 1/2 cup of whole wheat flour. You could use all-purpose flour. I mean, that's the original recipe. 1/2 teaspoon of salt and 1/2 cup of icy cold butter. I'm just going to whir that until the butter is cut into little pea-sized pieces. Now that our butter is cut up in nice little bits, I'm going to add 1/4 cup of icy cold water. And the same thing, I'm just going to pulse it till it comes together almost in a ball. You can add up to an extra tablespoon of water if you don't feel that it's coming together, but this is starting to ball up. And because I don't want to overmix it, I'll take it out right now. It's crumbly, but it'll come together in a ball really easily. I'm just going to gather it together. I don't want to work it too much with my hands because that will melt the butter. So I'll form it into a ball, flatten it into a disc, and put it in the fridge for 30 minutes. You could also put it in the freezer if you're short on time or if you want to make your apple twists right off the bat, which is what we're going to do. Now that our pastry is chilling, we'll get started on prepping the apples. We'll need 2 apples, and I'm going to cut each apple into 8 wedges. I love using vegetable peelers to peel apples. It's the easiest way I have ever found to just get rid of the skin and not lose too much of the flesh. So I'll quarter them and then core them. This is a blue ribbon recipe that my mom found back in the 50s, I think. It was a country fair winner someplace in the States. If you ever come across recipes that are country fair winners, you know that they're going to be good. Now I'm going to cut each quarter in half. Trying to keep them fairly even size, but you don't have to be too particular. So our apples are prepped. Our next step is to roll the pastry. We're going to roll our pastry into a 10 by 16 rectangle. So to help with the rolling, not that it has to be a perfect rectangle, but I'm going to start with a rectangle before I start rolling. Lightly floured surface. I'm going to roll this to about 1/8 of an inch. When I'm rolling my pastry, I want to use the least amount of flour possible. So we're 16 wide, but we're only 10 deep. We'll just get it 1 more inch up. And there we are. I'll even out the edges a little bit. Now remember, we have 16 wedges of apple. We're going to slice this pastry into 16 strips. So now that I know the halfway mark, I'll do 8 on each side. This is my little trick for being able to get the full 16 that are about the same width. So half and half. And half. I'm just creating little lines for myself because I'll use a pizza cutter to cut the strips. You could just use a knife. So this is what I mean by this recipe being a little fiddly. It's not difficult, but it's a little fiddly. Okay, I think that's 16. There we go. Now I'm going to bake them in a 9 by 13 pan. I've lined it with parchment paper, and each of these strips gets wrapped around one of our apple wedges. So, starting at the base, and just roll, and it doesn't need to be perfect. I'm just pinching the pastry closed a little bit. When I set them in the pan, I don't want them to be touching. Did you notice we haven't added any sugar? We will sprinkle these with a little bit of cinnamon sugar before they're baked, so there will be that sweetness to add to all of this, making it more apple pie-like. You can use any kind of apples for this recipe, whether it's Granny Smith or Cortland or Macintosh, really doesn't matter. Firm, soft, they all bake up beautifully. All right, so the next step is to brush each one of our little apple bundles with melted butter. I've melted 3 tablespoons of butter, and I'm going to brush each of our little bundles generously with the butter. We want lots of butter because then I'll sprinkle over cinnamon sugar, and the cinnamon sugar will stick really well thanks to the butter. We won't use all of the butter, and actually the original recipe from way back called for half a cup of butter. But 3 tablespoons is more than enough. I want to make sure everything is very well coated. Just look for any bare patches. And then I'm going to sprinkle them generously with cinnamon sugar. I have combined 1/4 cup of sugar with 1 tablespoon of cinnamon. And then I'm going to separate them, just again, making sure none of them are touching. And we have one more step before they go in the oven. Our cake has been in the oven for 60 minutes. I tested it at 55 minutes and it wasn't quite ready, but it's feeling ready now. We'll just put a tester in. As long as the tester comes out clean or with just a few moist crumbs attached, then it's ready. That came out clean. So we'll just set it to cool. When I took the cake out of the oven, I turned the temperature up to 450 degrees. It's a super hot oven that these apple slices bake in. We've got one more step before they go in the oven. I have half a cup of water that I'm going to pour over top. I'm just pouring it over my hand so it falls more gently. So these apples end up baking in kind of a buttery cinnamon syrup, and the water helps moisten the apples, so they'll be nice and soft when they come out of the oven. These apples will bake for 25 to 30 minutes, but I'll check them at 25 minutes. These twists are such a treat, especially when they're still warm. I like to eat them like cookies, but they can be served as dessert, 2 or 3 on a plate with a little ice cream or whipped cream. Apples are always an easy standby for baking. Whether it's for snacks or dessert or both, they lend themselves to treats that taste wholesome and satisfying. These rustic desserts aren't too fiddly. Even the apple twists are straightforward. I hope you make them in your kitchen too. Thanks for watching. Enjoy.